Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The program is about to begin. At this time, please silence all electronic devices. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. The program is about to begin. At this time, please silence all electronic devices. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Trey Gowdy.
Please be seated. Please be seated. Good evening, everyone. My name is John Highbush, and I have the honor of being the executive director of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation and Institute. Welcome. Thank you for joining us this evening. In honor of our men, turn up the volume. Thank you. In honor of our men and women in uniform who protect and defend us around the world every day, if you would please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please be seated. Before we get started, there are just a couple of people in the audience I would like to recognize. One of them is celebrating her 39th birthday, Congressman Elton and Janice Gallagher. Janice? Don't, Janice, 40 is not that bad. Don't. President Reagan once described his approach to decision-making like this, and I quote, "I don't take a vote, I make a decision." Ronald Reagan was a decisive leader. Not surprising for a man who launched his political career with a speech entitled "A Time for Choosing." He had to make life and death decisions every day as president. That doesn't mean that we don't face tough decisions ourselves, personal or professional. Sometimes we get it right. Sometimes we regret our choices. I know that all of you made at least one good decision today. You chose to be here. Thank you. Our guest tonight has written a book to help us with those important life decisions. It's based on strategies that he developed while prosecuting defendants in murder trials, something a lot more complicated and serious than many of us have had to face in our own lives. I know we have a lot of Trey Gowdy fans in the audience this evening. Some of you may know him from his show on Fox News Sunday Night in America. Some of you may have read his previous best-selling books. Some of you may recall when he chaired the House Oversight Committee and the House Select Committee on Benghazi. We might even have a few South Carolinians in the audience tonight. One, just one. Welcome. Regardless, with his newest book, Start, Stay, or Leave, you now have another reason to be a Trey Gowdy fan. His book is humorous, it is self-effacing, it is heartfelt, it is engaging, it is truly practical. I think I heard Dana Perino say it was one of the best self-help books that she had ever read. Me too. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the Reagan Library stage the best-selling author and former Congressman Trey Gowdy.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you all. Thank you very much. Thank you all. I've had a hard time keeping a job, listening to all the different things I've done. It's demoralizing.
Trey, just wonderful to have you here. Hey, all of you should know, we thought maybe about 400 people would come this evening, and then we had to add another 100 chairs, and then another 100 chairs, and then up in the balcony. So Trey, congratulations. You really...
I have a big family, so thank you all for being here. Could I want to say more than just thank you all. For most of my youth, I thought Ronald Reagan was my older brother. And the reason I thought that is my dad only had one picture on his desk at home. And it was not my mom, which was a source of some conflict later on, but it was not my mom, and it wasn't my three sisters, and it certainly wasn't me. It was this handsome, smiling man in a cowboy hat named Ronald Reagan, and he not only was a leader of the free world, but for people like my dad, he was even more than that. He represented a father figure. And so it is such an honor for me to be with you all and be in his library. And so thank you for the invitation.
Thank you, Trey. I read every page of the book. What I found, and for all of you who get it tonight, get it signed and read it, it's three basic sections: start, stay, leave. And we'll explain those in a minute. Under the start section, I was fascinated to see it's something I felt very much the same way in my youth. Tell us about you had a job that you say in the book you probably enjoyed and remembered the people you worked with more so than any other job, and yet it was just in this tobacco warehouse. Why is that?
It was unair conditioned, and I back then did not know the difference between Virginia Slims and Virginia Slim Light Menthol 100s, but we went and pulled tobacco orders, and the reason I loved it is my coworkers. And there are times in life where you love your coworkers more than what it is you're doing. I mean, there's nothing great about filling tobacco orders in an unair conditioned warehouse driving a forklift. But I loved Lester Butler and Jeff Kelly and Wesley Kelly and Bunny Clowney and Red Dawkins, and the fact that 30-something years later, those names still roll off my tongue. My dad was a doctor. Jeff and Wes grew up in a part of Spartanburg that my parents wouldn't even let me go to. It just wasn't safe. But that was their home. And so it was this beautiful combination of different socioeconomic groups and different races, and from at least 8:30 to 5 every day, we had a common purpose. And that friendship, I mean, Jeff Kelly, what he had to overcome in life, his dad was not a doctor, but for that guy to rise to be the head of concessions for the Carolina Panthers, and for Wesley Kelly, who just retired after a long career with a company in Spartanburg, sometimes we love our coworkers enough that it makes up for whatever deficiencies there may be in the job, and it makes it hard to leave. You can't live on what I was making in that tobacco warehouse, although lots and lots of men had to try. So I had other alternatives. I had other forces pushing me. It wasn't just a summer job for them. It was their job. And you're right, I loved it. No offense to any other job I've had, but I look more forward to going to work at the tobacco warehouse than I have any other job I've had.
You wrote, also again, this is under the start section, so I'll say your younger days, that you wished at the time that you had figured out that you should care a whole heck of a lot more about what you thought about yourself than what other people thought about you. And that in your early years, you really felt this force. It's like, I got to be what other people want me to be. Talk about that.
I mean, I think we all kind of construct different prisons for ourselves. Some of those prisons are external factors, what other people expect us to do, how other people define success, how other people define failure or losing. And by the way, to me, those are two different things. So if we can get to the point in life where we kind of own and define those terms for ourselves. I still care very much. Both my parents are living. I care very much what they think. I care a whole lot what my wife thinks. And there are a handful of other people. But beyond that, I have reached this peace where if I'm at peace, that's enough. And if other people don't think that's successful, or other people think that I should have done something else, it's liberating. And I'm not saying to not be bound by any mores or any set of principles. To the contrary, I'm just saying define them for yourself. You decide what success is in your life. And the life that I saw, particularly whatever's left of it, did not involve elective office. A lot of people say, but you were a chairman and you were on House Intel and you could have done this and you could have done that. That's all what they may have done if they were me, but they were not. Well, we get one crack at this gift called life. One crack at it. So to let other people define success, significance, failure, losing, I wish I'd learned that earlier in life, but I guess better late than never. I'm going to define success as the countenance when I look into the eyes of the people I love the most. And so for me to be a committee chairman and never see the person that I claim to love more than anyone else in the world being my wife, how do those two go together? So for me, they did not, and I'd picked husband over committee chairman.
Yeah, good on you. Prior to this job, I had a great friend, never graduated high school, but worth billions of dollars because of what he made of himself. And he used to tell me, he said, Johnny, when the time to take really big risk and just let it all go and is when you're young, because you don't have a lot to lose, right? And in your book, I noticed you really leaned hard on this subject. You said, your phrase is, hey, what's the worst that can happen? Tell me about that.
I think we all need a paradigm for decision making. And, for all of my fraternity brothers in college, it was, hey, watch this. That was their, which either resulted in a trip to the emergency room or the police station or something else. I don't recommend that paradigm. Mine was, what's the worst thing that can happen? So I'm a young father, a new husband. I've got what I thought was my dream job at the United States Attorney's Office. I had tried so hard to get that job. And yet I felt this desire to run for district attorney, or what we call solicitor in South Carolina. Now, I didn't leave the U.S. Attorney's Office to become the solicitor or district attorney. I left to run against a guy that had been in office for 24 years and went to my church. And my father was the pediatrician for his 6 children. He'd never lost a political race. So I'm sitting there thinking, what's the worst thing that can happen? There are a lot of bad things that can happen. But I could not surrender the desire to at least try. So I thought the worst thing that could happen would be to lose. Okay, well, do I have a plan? Can I survive? Can I support my family? Can I get another job practicing law? And I'll tell you how terrible I was. It took me about 1.5 years to decide to run. I tell you what, running against an incumbent in your own primary is just dumb. And why I've done it twice, I don't know. But so I'm running. I've left the U.S. Attorney's Office. I can't go back. And I'm at a wedding reception with my wife. And one of the supporters of my opponent comes up to me and says, you know, we like you. We think you have a bright political future, but not now. We ran a poll and you're losing 80-20. I already wasn't happy at being at a wedding reception. So you can imagine, I went and got my wife, and she could just tell in my eyes. She said, you look like you've seen a ghost. I said, yeah, I saw my political career. Yeah, I've seen a ghost. So I said, I'm going to drop out. It took me 1.5 years to decide to run. Every consequence of that decision I had already faced. Lost my job, lost my coworkers. Everything bad that could happen, I'd already experienced, except public humiliation. So I called my then campaign advisor, a political scientist at Clemson University, and I said, Dr. Woodard, I'm going to drop out. They ran a poll, and I'm losing 80-20. And he said, thank God you're up to 20. I ran a poll last month. And you were at 2%. So now you're up to 20. And I sit there and think, John, but for my wife and Dave Woodard, would have dropped out because of my fear of public humiliation. So, I write about fear a lot in this book. Fear should not have been for me coming up on the short end of a political race. I'm almost positive that Ronald Reagan lost the nomination. I'm almost positive Abraham Lincoln lost. Every hero I've had is lost. So why was I so afraid of losing? And if we can figure out how to redefine what losing or failure is, so I got up out of the 20%. But the notion that we would take 1.5 years to weigh and balance making a decision, and then in the course of 30 seconds, because of a fear that other people would ridicule us, I was willing to undo that decision. I needed to read a book on decision making, not write one. That was dumb.
You write, every decision involves your head, your heart, your gut. So which of those should win out in a decision?
The way I like to do it for my life, I'm a logic-driven person. I will not allow the students I teach an undergraduate class and I teach a class at the law school. And I will not allow the students to begin a sentence with, I feel. Which means I can't have any conversations with my daughter because every one of her sentences begins, I feel, and has the word like in it. like this or it's like that. Emotions are what provide the music for our life. That's the way I look at it. Logic is telling me where I want to go. I want you to think of a navigation device. Okay, where do you want to go? What is the closing picture you visualize for your life or your career? What's that perfect ending? So how do I get there? Logic charts the course. Emotion provides the background music. And intuition tells me when to slow down or speed up a little bit, or maybe it's time to take a break and get something to drink. That's the way I look at it. I don't mean to sound like hopelessly unromantic. Emotions are powerful. They're powerful. But they're just sometimes unreliable. So logic, number one, emotion. Fear is an emotion. And I let it like chart the course for too much of my life. So I just changed fear into caution. And caution's something you can ride in the car with. Fear wants to take over the steering wheel. Don't let fear take it over. Caution is smart. Fear is debilitating. Logic, intuition, and then I'm going to let emotion pick whatever country song I want to listen to while I'm driving.
Wow. Okay, you also suggest in the start section that, like anything, it's like I've read before. Okay, you have a tough decision to make. What school am I going to go to? Should I take this job? Things like that. So you say, all right, list the pros and cons. Write the list of everything that's pro, put it under here. But I find myself, when I force myself through that discipline, that it's hard to be honest with myself about, is something really a pro or a con? I start loading the deck almost, as it were. Yeah. How do you force yourself to be honest with yourself in those situations?
Well, I would say two things. In defense of you, I would say anyone in the world can identify pros and cons. Just like a lawyer in a courtroom, this is a piece of evidence we need to introduce. This is something the jury's going to want to know. What distinguishes good lawyers from not good lawyers is how they weight that evidence. This is a pro, and this one pro can overrule every one of the cons, because that's how powerful that pro is. So you can have 20 pros and 100 cons and still decide to do it, because they're not weighted the same. The con for everything is you may die. Every shot I've ever gotten in my arm, somebody has said, there's a very small chance this flu vaccine is going to kill you. But I don't even pay attention to it. The greater probability is my arm's going to hurt and I'm not going to be able to play golf that afternoon. That's the greater fear. So I would say, in your defense, the weighting of the pros and cons. The other thing I would say to you about being honest with yourself, it is never good to be dishonest with other people. It's just not. We're taught not to do it. It's not good. I understand why we would lie to others. We want to make ourselves appear better or smarter or more successful. It's not right, it's not good, but I understand it. I do not understand lying to ourselves. I've never understood looking in the mirror and being anything other than completely objectively true. So if you have a weakness, like my weakness for a long part of my life is I cared too much what other people thought about me. So if I'm making a decision on whether or not I should do something or seek something, I'm glad that I had a little bit of self-awareness that I'm probably overvaluing this, the public component part of it, because in my head, I've overvalued that. I've skewed it. The reality is, most people don't notice most parts of our lives. And most people are forgiving. If you make a mistake, they're forgiving. And if you do something great, they may not remember it the next day. So why am I spending so much of my life trying to pursue public approval when it's fleeting? You got to know that about yourself. If you read this book, I am huge on self-awareness. I, again, understand we want to project something to the world that may not be fully accurate. I do not understand the person looking back at you when you're brushing your teeth not being honest with that person. You got to be. Nobody else has to hear it, but you got to be.
Okay, we're going to move on to the stay section now, and then we'll hit leave. I promise, I'm sure there's some of you out there say, ask them about Benghazi, ask them about Benghazi. we will get to that.
I had a former colleague ask me about it today on the phone, so he's getting ready to chair a committee himself.
What's BL in your world?
BL?
BL.
Did I write BL?
Yeah, you did. Okay, you're going to remember it, I promise. This is when you're in, I think you're in college and you decide.
Oh my heavens. No, my therapist has encouraged me to block that entire story out of my mind. Oh my heavens. Well, when I was in college, my desire was to construct a schedule that only consisted of afternoon classes and had no labs, no projects. I had to watch all my children at a certain time, but I also had intramurals and other things that just schoolwork got in the way of that stuff. So I saw this offering, BL, and I said, well, bowling should be an easy A. I mean, it's right across from the dorm I'm living in. I went to Baylor in Waco, Texas, and the bowling lanes are downstairs in the Daniel Student Building, and, you know, I'll shoot over there, I'll bowl a few frames, I'll get an easy A. My dad will be happy about that. So I signed up for it, and I go over to the building, and I go down to the bowling lanes, there's nobody there. And I thought, well, that's strange, these are the bowling lanes. So there was a note. We are meeting across the street in another building. I thought, okay, well, that's strange, but they are Southern Baptists, so maybe something is going on here. And I went over there, and I walk in the door, and BL did not stand for bowling. BL stood for ballet. And I did, all kidding aside, it was the most gorgeous pirouette you have ever seen in your life as I walk in and realize what I have done and begin to walk back out. I hear Rudy, the instructor, say, Harold Gowdy. I should have just said, well, that's not the name I go by, so I don't know who you're talking about. So I stopped, and he said, you're in the right class. You're in the right class. We have you on it. He said, and we had a conversation, and he said, you'll get an A. You don't need to wear anything other than what you got on. And I stayed in that class. I was the only male. Maybe that goes without saying. I was the only male. I still know the 5 ballet positions. I think there are 5. I still have friends from that class. I had a friend in that class who sent her daughter to meet me while I was in Congress. So everything told me to leave. Everything said, you are an idiot. But I stayed. And because I stayed, I learned more about myself and about my instructor. He was great. I still have friends from that class. I couldn't tell you any other class I took at Baylor. But I can tell you about the one that I thought was bowling but was not. So, probably could have written the book without that story in it, but that story gives Kevin McCarthy a lot of pleasure. The point is, staying may seem painful for a second. It may seem unexciting. I mean, there's excitement about starting. Staying may occasionally seem like we're settling and not striving, but sometimes staying right where you are is the very best decision you can make.
Yeah, yeah. Talk to me, you write about the difference between a film and a snapshot.
Well, the film is the way I kind of view our lives. Your life is a film. And a snapshot is just a moment in that. And I have seen so many of my colleagues and so many staffers in DC, even some folks at the courthouse who go after the snapshot. Maybe it's a title, maybe it's an accolade, maybe it's some award, and they lose sight of the overall film. How does this film end? I think the story I tell in the book is about a young woman who had a chance to go work on a very prestigious committee, on a very prestigious assignment. It would have been, for that snapshot in life, it would have been a big deal. But that was not the film. That's not the way she saw the film of her life. So she did what's really hard, which is say, I'm going to stay where I am. This snapshot is alluring, it is tempting, it is what other people maybe think I ought to do. It's a title. Sometimes the title is better than the job, and the title doesn't last, and the euphoria you feel doesn't last. So she did a really wise thing, and she viewed her life kind of as one continuous film instead of a series of snapshots. By the way, she was, and the congressman will know this, she was the staff director for the largest congressional committee in Washington, the Oversight Committee. That's as high as a staffer can go. This would be the staff director. She and her husband and 3 children decide that they see a different closing argument in life. They leave very successful jobs in Northern Virginia with their 3 kids in school, and they move to this little tiny town called Greenville, South Carolina. So not only did she pick the film over the snapshot, she made the very difficult decision of leaving the political epicenter of the world for a different kind of lifestyle.
He's probably happy about it too.
Yes, sir.
You write that everyone in life should have their own Nathan. What's that mean?
Well, my mom will be very happy that I know the story of Nathan from the Old Testament. All the time she spent driving me to Sunday school. King David, as we know, was on the rooftop and he saw Bathsheba bathing, and thereafter made a series of terrible decisions, including conspiracy to commit murder. Went and had Bathsheba's husband Uriah killed. So after that happened, Nathan, who was a prophet and an advisor to King David, decided to tell him a story about a rich man who had everything and a poor man who had nothing. And we've heard this phrase, you're the man. You can't go to a sporting event without hearing somebody hits a tee shot at Augusta National, you hear, you're the man. Well, that's exactly what Nathan said to David. He told him this story about a rich man who took advantage of a poor man. Took the only thing that mattered to him. And David said, as sure as I sit here, I will have that man's life. And Nathan said, you are that man. Do we have someone in our lives that will, better yet, stop you when you're on the rooftop staring at Bathsheba? That's the best kind of Nathan, is someone who will say, look, you don't want to do this. This does not get you to your final closing argument in life. This is not the film you want for your life. Do we have someone that will stop us? If we don't have that, do we have someone in the aftermath who will come to us and say, you were wrong? You were wrong to do that. And I think to be a Nathan, or to have a Nathan, you need to be one to other people. Tim Scott, whom I know was here recently and will preach my funeral one day as long as he's not the one that kills me. And even then, I'm not sure my wife wouldn't let him do it, but he and I try to provide that for one another. We're lucky if we have one handful of people that love us and care about us enough to say, even to the most powerful man in the kingdom, King David, you are that man. You're the man I'm describing that did wrong. And how great would it be to have them before we make the decision? So who are our advisors? Who do we listen to? Who do we solicit counsel from? Who do we accept counsel from? And every bit as important as who the Nathans are, you got to tune out the voices that don't matter. I'm so glad that I am not growing up with social media like our kids and grandkids are, where strangers comment on us. But I also wish I could tell every young person, why do you care what someone who does not know you or care about you or love you thinks about you? I would sit there and watch my colleagues go through their social media feeds, and you could just almost gauging the reaction on their face. This person thinks I'm the smartest person in the world. This person thinks I'm the dumbest person in the world. You can't be both, and chances are you're not either one. So why do we listen to voices of people that don't even know us? So the chapter on Nathan is making sure we have good advisors. Believe it or not, sometimes people give us advice that's in their best interest and not our own. I don't want to spoil anything for anybody, but sometimes people are selfish. If we have 3 or 4 people in our lives that will give us accurate, timely, motive-less advice, to receive it, you got to give it. So if you want a Nathan, you got to be a Nathan, which also causes us to do some reflection on whether or not the advice we give. And that's how I met Tim Scott. He was the Elvis Presley of our freshman class. I wasn't even Colonel Parker. He didn't even know I was alive. But we found ourselves at a dinner table, and he was at a rough spot. And the leadership in the house was pulling him to do something. And I had a choice. I could either agree with leadership and try to curry favor with them, or I could say, you know what, Tim, I'm going to give you the best advice for you. That's the night that I think we began to trust one another enough to become what we are now. And it was giving advice that was best for the recipient, not best for myself or anyone else.
Yeah, yeah. I've had a point in my career, I remember I asked myself the question, well, just because you might be good at something, does that necessarily mean that that's what you're supposed to do? And I saw a reflection of that in your own experience, and you write about it in the book when you were trying to decide whether to, well, I think you decided you wanted out of Congress. Talk about that time in your life and the role Speaker Ryan played and how all that worked.
Yeah, I mean, I used to tell people I left because I didn't enjoy it and I was not good at it. And my wife and mom both said, will you please stop saying you were not good at it? And I said, okay, I didn't like it and I didn't want to be good at it. Politics, when you contrast that with what I used to do in a courtroom, you can have the right person for the right crime, and if you don't do it the right way, you don't win. The police have to do it the right way. The prosecutor has to do it the right way. You can't hide the ball. You have to give them every piece of evidence you have, no matter how heinous the crime. I had a murder case one time. It was unsolved for 10 years. The lead case agent put in the file, Jonathan Vick did not commit this murder, stop interviewing him. This was the lead case agent. You can imagine how problematic that was in a subsequent prosecution of Jonathan Vick for the murder. You have to turn it over. It's hard. It's a damning piece of evidence. But we're called to a higher standard. The process matters. Fast forward to politics. We've convinced ourselves winning is the only thing that matters. Doesn't matter how we do it. Doesn't matter the quality of our candidates. If it's this initial or that initial, because we have to have the gavels, we have to have the majority, and we tell ourselves that the end justifies the means. And what I'm telling myself is, you can do both, but I can't flourish in a system where the way we do things and conduct ourselves doesn't matter. I can't. I don't want to. So I made up my mind after 3 terms. Look, and I was lucky. I mean, I had colleagues that let me chair subcommittees and let me chair committees and all the things that people who are in politics really want to do. Be a committee chairman, have a gavel, make people call you chairman, which I hated, but still, all the trappings that you're supposed to enjoy, and none of it was fulfilling. So I decided I wasn't going to run, and then Tim prevailed upon me, and you're right, there were 73 people that wanted to be on the House Intelligence Committee. And the Speaker is the only one who picks, as we learned this week with someone who was unpicked for the Intel Committee. The Speaker and the Speaker alone makes that call. And so it came down to me and John Ratcliffe. And Paul made the mistake of picking me over John Ratcliffe. And so for me to walk in after 2 years and say, you gave me this highly coveted committee spot, you helped me get the chairmanship of oversight, and I am leaving. I'm leaving. I don't want to do it anymore. The reaction I got from then Speaker Ryan was not what I thought I was going to get. I thought that he was going to try to, my weakness is friendship. I thought he was going to try to say, I need you, just like Tim Scott had done. But I knew that day that I was not the only one leaving, although he would not announce it publicly for some time. I don't know what it was like when he got into politics. And I'm not saying it changed the time I was there. I left the courtroom, and that was the right decision to make. Speaking of leaving, that was the right decision to make. For the betterment of what's left of my soul, that was the right decision. But I'm not sure starting Congress was the right decision. That one's tough. I met people that have changed my life. I love back to the warehouse. I love some of my coworkers, but I didn't enjoy the work. And sometimes we have to decide, do we stay even though we love our job but don't love our coworkers? Do we stay if we love our coworkers but not the job? And for me, 8 wound up being a little more than enough. And you know, when you're gone, that you won't pass this way again. The chances of, there are only 435 members of the House. I shocked every teacher I ever had by being elected to the House of Representatives. It's an incredible honor, but it's not what I see when I look at the end. And if it's not what I see when I look in the end, why am I doing it now?
Yeah.
And that's why I left.
Yeah, that takes real courage. How do you like your present role, having a program, your own show on Fox News? You enjoying it?
Well, I tell you what, you have no idea how hard it is to read off of a teleprompter. It is. It is. Fox has never once told me what I could or could not say. They've never once said, you have to have this guest or you cannot have this guest. If you've watched the show and wondered, gosh, who does the writing? That is terrible. They let me write every word that comes out of my mouth. So on the downside, I don't have anybody to blame. On the plus side, they've been fantastic. I don't want to do it more, again, letting other people's expectations control our lives. Most people on the weekends want to go Monday to Friday. They want a weeknight show. Or if you're, Jesse Waters, you want to be on TV 8 days out of 7. I mean, that guy and Gutfeld and Dana, they have like a trillion shows between them. And they're really good at it. I am content. I don't want a daily show. I can't come up with the content. I mean, it takes me about 4 days to get ready for that hour. I'm not proud of that, but it takes me about 4 days. I love teaching. I met somebody out when I was looking at the memorial for President Reagan and Mrs. Reagan. He said he listened to my podcast. I love doing the podcast. I have one legal client, so I don't practice enough law to hurt any clients. I love where I am, and I am very grateful that Fox lets me do it, and they let me do what I want to do, and they let me do it 1 day a week.
Yeah. Has your
Thank you.
Has your impression, has your view of the media changed at all since you've gone into the media?
No, sir. It has not. I write in the book, people used to stop me at the grocery store and say, how in the world can you tolerate fill in the blank, whatever, politician they like the least. How in the world can you work with this person, that person? I never had like super high expectations of my political opponents. I just did not. It was kind of like being back in the courtroom. I didn't expect the defense attorney. I expected him or her to be the way that they were. It was the judge that would surprise me. If the judge was not fair, if the judge was putting his or her thumb on the scale, that surprised me. But defense attorneys and my political opponents are going to be what they are. That had nothing to do with me being so disillusioned in Washington. It was the group that claims to be the neutral, detached arbiter of the news. Whether it's Politico, The Hill, The Washington Post, New York Times, could probably count on one hand the number of quasi-positive stories I saw about people on my side of the aisle. And I could count on one hand the negative stories I saw on folks on the other side of the aisle. So if you read my book, fair is the word that I covet. Well, they're not going to say I was smart. So fair and funny. So you can imagine what it does to me when I perceive unfairness. And, John Radcliffe, another one of my dear, dear friends, talked to him today when I was at the hotel. And I think back to his confirmation. I don't know if y'all know Radcliffe or not. He was the DNI for President Trump, congressman, former U.S. attorney, on House Intel. What the media did to him when he was up for Director of National Intelligence, and then I contrast that with the almost no scrutiny that some other folks get, it just to me is not fair. And unfairness breeds unfairness. You can either be outraged by it, or you can begin to also treat people unfairly. And I don't ever want to get to that point. So it's better for me to leave. Has it changed? No, not. I mean, I don't consider myself to be like a journalist. I don't know what I am, but I'm not like a journalist. But even not claiming to be a journalist, I try to be fair on my show. I don't interrupt Democrat guests that I have. I don't sabotage them. I don't wait until they get off air and then say something. I just think fairness matters. And we didn't have it with the DC media, and it was very disillusioning, much more so than any conduct from any of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle.
Yeah. How do you feel about this country's future?
Future? I got to remind myself, we have been through some really, really challenging times. I can't imagine living in the 1860s. You and I were talking about Charleston, the birthplace of the Civil War. And I can't imagine that. I can't imagine, I was born in the 60s, but I don't remember it. So the Vietnam era, the Great Depression, my parents were both born in 1939. It's impossible for me to process that my parents were born while World War II was going on. So we've had a ton of challenges, and we've risen them and we've met them. What I worry about is that those fleeting moments of unity that we used to have, whether it's the aftermath of Oklahoma City or the aftermath of 9/11, those moments are even more fleeting. And it's almost by that afternoon we have begun to try to seize some political advantage from what used to be unifying. And I don't mind people that disagree with me. I got a daughter that she might vote for me, but it would not be because she agreed with me on anything. The ability to like find something in common enough to sustain a relationship, even if it's not political, I don't know. I'd be curious. You didn't ask me about the party, but the party, when I think of Ronald Reagan, I think of a doctrinaire conservative. Conservatism is a way of life. It's not an electoral strategy. That it is worth pursuing even if in the short term you don't have political success, because we believe it. Populism just really requires a good pollster. Just go find out what people believe and repeat it back to them. I am much more into persuasion. And I don't see a ton of persuasion in politics anymore. The ability to move people even incrementally a little bit closer to what we believe requires a different skill set. Simply finding a room full of people who already agree with us and repeating it back to them does not require a skill set. I mean, I had 12 people that I didn't know that couldn't get out of jury service. That's who I had to persuade. And I mean, I hate to say it that way, but they couldn't get out of jury service.
Yeah.
That's a different skill set than me having 12 cops sitting in the jury box, just ratifying what they already believe. So what I like to say is we do have challenges, but I'd rather have our challenges than anybody else's challenges. And I think the American people are better than the politics that we present and better than what we see on the news at night. I just think we are better than that.
Now, I think you're just the right person to ask this question of, because of your positions chairing oversight. You know, the Republicans now have this very slim majority in the House, and so here we go. They're going to be able to chair judiciary oversight and the rest, and now here comes the issues, the ones that we've been licking our chops over, whether it's Biden's laptop or issues on the southern border, all the rest. Are you at all concerned that we're going to have 2 years of chasing people and lots of headlines with an unfair media and not get to the really critically important issues for the nation, whether it's the federal deficit, spending, and all the rest? Is this just going to be a lot of theater because we've gotten a slim advantage, or do you think Republicans will be able to make real change?
I don't think when you have 1/2 of 1/3 of government that you're going to be able to affirmatively do much of anything. And I'm a big believer in, even if the voters don't want to hear it, tell them the truth about what a realistic expectation is. They maybe, with a 5-vote majority, can pass some laws in the House. They're not going to pass the Senate, and they're not going to be signed by President Biden. So for me to sit here and say that because we have the House, we are going to do the following would be disingenuous, because I know sitting here right now, it's not going to happen. It's easy for me to say, we're going to reform this, and we're going to do that, and we're going to do that. But then on the drive home, you're going to say, well, that's not even going to get a vote in the Senate, because Schumer's not going to bring it up for a vote. So how are you going to get that in law? So if you're not going to have legislative success, then I think the attention then turns to the non-legislative matters, oversight, review, investigations, but I also think it's important to set realistic expectations there. I mean, Jimmy Jordan was usually who I would go ask for if he were not already given to me on a committee, because the guy is tenacious. He is a bulldog. He's a very hard worker. We did not see eye to eye on everything, but the thing I'll tell you about Jimmy is he's going to punch you in the face, not in the back. I mean, he will tell you eyeball to eyeball. I always wanted him on whatever I was doing. So he's on Judiciary. You got Jamie Comer. You got Mike Turner on Intel. What I would want them to tell you if they were in front of you is, yes, we're going to seek witnesses and documents, and we're going to issue subpoenas. But you know who enforces subpoenas. That's the executive branch. And I don't think the Biden administration is going to prosecute itself for contempt of Congress. And the audience would be disappointed. But their expectations would be realistic. And that kind of deep-seated anger that comes from unmet expectations, I'd rather have them knowledgeable and a little bit disappointed tonight than build their expectations knowing it's never going to happen. I mean, look, you hold someone, you're only as good as the witnesses and documents you can access. So I won't call his name because he called me in confidence today. He's chairing a committee. He said, I want to talk to you about how you got documents. Well, we didn't, because we were trying to get them from the Obama administration. And so you send a subpoena, they don't give you the documents. Are you prepared to cut their funding? So what's going to happen if DOJ doesn't send documents to Jimmy Jordan and he threatens to go to the appropriators and say, you know what, we're going to give you a haircut in the budget bill? The media narrative would be, you're less safe today because Republicans cut prosecutor funding or cut cops. So you got to weigh and balance, can you win that argument publicly? You're still not going to get the documents, no matter what. So realistic expectations. Can you shine more light than has been shown? Yes. Can you get some answers? Yes. But if I had a nickel for every person who asked me, why did you never prosecute fill in the blank? And I can vision it right now in the Publix grocery store on Saturday morning, me saying again, no member of Congress can prosecute anyone for anything. The executive branch does that. We cannot do that. Anger comes from unmet expectations. So tell them the truth up front. We're going to do our best. We're going to try. We're going to try to do this and try to do that. But if you think you're going to subpoena people and force them to come when you don't have anyone backing up those subpoenas, I don't think it's going to happen.
Let me ask the question. I don't know if you've got a viewpoint on this, but it's one that's on the mind of so many conservatives, Republicans. And it's what's brewing on the Republican side of the fence with the race for the presidency. You've got Trump who's announced and a dozen that might announce. What do you think's going to happen?
Well, it looks right now like I'm the only guy from South Carolina who's not running for president. It sure sounds like Governor Haley is taking a hard look at it. I think Senator Scott is taking a hard look at it. I bumped into my colleague and somebody I love to death personally, Mike Pompeo. I don't know what he's going to wind up doing, but you've got governors, you've got former governors, you got a deep bench. Now, if you could have a conversation that was thoughtful and constructive and issue-based, it'd be one thing. That's just, I mean, political debates now are 30, I mean, imagine this. You have 30 seconds to tell us your view of different threats the United States faces around the world, but if you go more than 30 seconds, I'm gonna cut you off. I mean, you can't do, my wife can't order an appetizer in less than 5 minutes. I mean, that's what drives me nuts about debate. They're not debates. They're like soundbite comparisons. We got a deep bench. I wish I didn't even mention the current governor of Florida, who also was on oversight and judiciary with me. He was not a classmate. He came right after me, but, and we had a great relationship until we played alternate shot together in a golf tournament, and good Lord, DeSantis put me places that Lewis and Clark couldn't find the places that DeSantis hit that golf ball. Good Lord. So you got Ronnie, who overwhelmingly wins re-election in what they used to say was kind of a purple state. Marco really exceeded expectations in his re-elect. I mean, I know I'm naive to think that you could be respectful to one another and have a conversation and say, this is what I plan to do. So this would be my question, I guess, back to people. Do we want that, or do we want the professional wrestling style? When I think of Ronald Reagan and I think of some of the things that were said in the 2016 presidential run, I just can't hear any of those words coming out of his mouth. I mean, he is the author of the 11th commandment. And even Jim DeMint, who many people consider to be the father of the Tea Party movement, he was the congressman from the upstate of South Carolina and a senator, and he ran the Heritage Foundation. Mr. DeMint said 80% is enough. If you agree with me on 80% of it, that's enough. And then I look at the modern political environment, and 99 is a failing grade. If you're not like perfect on everything. So, I mean, there have only been 2 perfect people to the best of my knowledge. One of them is from Israel, and the other is my wife, and neither one of them are running for president. So, I'm naive. That's not the way it's going to turn out. I don't know where I was. Oh, I was on my television show, which is why I felt so lonely. I think there was an NFL game on that night, so I was really just talking to myself. But we are picking the leader of the free world. So I want you don't have to answer out loud, but be honest. Have you ever binge watched a miniseries? I mean, have you ever spent 3 or 4 hours doing nothing but watching something? And yet, an hour and a half is too long to have a debate over who's going to be the leader of the free world. Our debate structure sets it up to be more like WWF wrestling than it is worthy of being the leader of the American people. So I wish they would change that. They're not, but I wish they were. And you can probably tell by the guy that I picked to give my eulogy, Senator Scott, that I hope he offers. Here's the other thing I hope. I hope people who run for president, you stop and think, I could probably name 12 people right now that are interested in being the president of the United States. Of those 12, maybe not a one will ever be successful. Does that mean they failed? Does that mean they lost? I mean, there have only been, I mean, I know we had Grover Cleveland twice, but not back to back. There were 46, is that right? 46 presidents, 45 different people, 46 times. Does it mean that you failed because you didn't get something that less than 50 people have ever gotten out of 500 million? So what I really hope is that they conduct themselves in a respectful manner worthy of our support, even if they're not, quote, successful. But I don't know what's going to happen. And honestly, if there's a good football game on that night, I probably won't watch it.
Trey, I knew this would be a special hour. We are just so honored that you come visit with us, and it's just been terrific spending this time with you.
Thank you. Y'all been fantastic. Thank you so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, please remain seated as our special guest leaves the building.